Well, welcome, a Swedish word for welcome. Anyways, welcome to week 5. We're going to basically continue on with chapter 3. And chapter 3, starting with 3.7, starts talking about variables and declaration and basically how long does a variable live. Okay, and you realize a variable has a life and a death. It's created, so it's born, it lives, and at some point it dies. Well, if we come over here and take a look at the variable scope program right here, now within this class variable scope, I could have multiple methods inside of there. So this string first name is a method. Now right there, when this method is basically called, and since it's a void main, it's called as soon as the program is executed and ran. This guy is born and lives. Okay, so we basically then we load it here through a JOption pane, and then I basically say string last name is basically so it's basically born right there. That's created, and then we load it from the JOption pane there, and then I say hello, first name and last name, and then I say system exit. Now, right here, when it hits this brace, and this brace right here is the ending brace for this method. When it hits that brace, both the first name and the last name are now gone. They're no longer in memory. Now, I will say this, they still contain data. That data is still sitting in that. So let me back up a little bit. String first name is created and it's sitting in memory. It's got an address. We load it with whatever we type through the JOption pane. Same thing with last name. Then as soon as you hit that brace, first name and last name are no longer available, but that data is still sitting up there in memory. And sometimes, I don't have any good examples, but you'll have what we call memory leaks, and that's where we may extend beyond what our variable currently has, and next thing you know, we're picking up data like this first name and last name. Because that data is still sitting there in memory, we just don't have access to it because we don't have any variables that go against that data. So, when does a variable live? Right here when it's created, when it's instantiated. And when does it die? As soon as we hit the end of that method, it's dead. Now, if I declared a variable here, for example, if I had string mname, we'll call it middle name. Now, that's a perfectly valid place to create a variable. The only problem is it can now be used with any method inside of this class. So if I had multiple methods, then we'd be able to use that variable. Now that variable lives as soon as this class is instantiated. And when does it die? When it hits this brace down here. So when the program basically stops running, or that we're no longer using that class, then that variable is dead. But as soon as this class is created, that variable lives, and it lives throughout every method inside of here. So just realize that. Okay, so that's the declaration and scope. Basically, declaring a variable and scope is how long does it live? When does it die? Now, we've talked about the if then else statement. So if this is true, do this, else, meaning it's false, do this. Well, we can continue on with that with a thing called the switch statement. Now we've seen the if else state, or the else if statement. That means we can have if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else if, and continue on until we no longer need it. Now if we're going to do something like that, we should really try to avoid an else if statement. The reason being is else ifs are kind of hard to read and understand. What we should, well, I won't say understand, but they just don't look as easily flowed as something else. A switch statement, though, allows us to have multiple parameters of a conditional statement and then allow us to just make one choice. So to kind of give you an example of what a switch statement looks like, let's take a look at the switch demo. And we do have a class called switch demo. We have our void main, and inside there we've declared a variable, and we've declared our scanner keyboard so we can get information or data from the keyboard. And then I say sys out, print that, we get a number. Okay, so they're going to choose a number 1, 2, or 3. So now I've got this switch statement. So the switch statement is going to use number as input, and I say case 1, case 2, case 3, and then default. Now, one thing I want you to pay close attention to, this case 1 says, this is like saying if number is equal to 1. Case 2 is saying if number is equal to 2. Okay, so right now if number is equal to 2, this case statement says it's not 2, so move on. It goes to the next one and basically continues on. Now once this statement is executed, it's done. It basically stops running. How do I know? Well, the one thing we have to do with inside of each case statement is we have to put what's called a break. The break says I'm done with this, move on. Okay. Now when we use a switch statement, we always want to make sure that we have a way to use something if all the others are not true, kind of like an else, an overall else. So if it's not 1, it's not 2, or it's not 3, then we have a thing called default down here. In this case, we're saying that's not 1, 2, or 3. Okay. So 1, we're saying you entered a 1, 2, we're saying you entered a 2, 3, entered a 3. So if I were to run this, it comes up and says enter a 1, 2, or 3. If I type in a 2 and hit the enter key, it comes up you entered a 2. Okay. So again, break statement, very important. If I did not, so for example, if I take this, I'm going to comment that out. I'll comment that break statement. I'm going to do the same exact run. I'm going to type in a 2 and hit the enter key, and it says you entered a 2 and you entered a 3. Oh, what just happened there? Well, what it did is it's going to run once this is true. This is going to run until it hits a break statement. So it executed that line and it also executed that line. Then it hit the break and came out. Now if I didn't have a break there, it would have done the last one as well. So very, very important to have those break statements in there. We're telling it we're done with that case statement. Let's get out. Okay, so yeah, and that's kind of what the no breaks is demonstrating there. They're basically saying, okay, so if I were to run this guy and I typed in a 1, watch what happens. Entered a 1, entered 2, entered 3, so it hits all of them because there's no breaks. Now, if we take a look at pet food, there we have a situation where, again, we got a class pet food, we've got our string main, we've got 2 variables, input and food grade. That's a char, that means it's 1 character. Char print line out, our pet food is, and we get an input and a food grade. We're getting those each from the keyboard. And it's input.char at, so basically keyboard, next line. So what is this statement doing right here? Well, input is getting information from what we type in. Food grade is just grabbing the very first letter of that string. So now we come in here and we say switch food grade. So we're looking at the first character. If it's an A, Look, notice how we have case A, case capital A. Well, this is basically kind of like saying, hey, here's a case A. Well, since there's nothing between it, it's going to move on to the next one as well. So that's kind of like saying if it's lowercase a or it's an uppercase A, then basically do this. Again, there's our break statement. Small b, little b, small c, little c. And then we have our default, again, which is kind of like our else statement. Now, is there an easier way to do this? Well, as we're going to see here in a little bit, yes, there is a very, very easy way to do this because of the casing. We can actually say ignore the case, or we can change the case. So, let's take a look at one more, which is seasons. So if you look at seasons, there's our class seasons, there's our public static void main. We declare a input string statement or variable. We declare our keyboard so we can get stuff by typing it in. Enter the name of season, we get the input. So here I have, so here we have, if they typed in spring, then we're going to print out la primavera. If it's summer, or verano. If it's fall, el otoño. And winter, el invierno. Okay, so it looks like we're basically getting some type of a Spanish verbiage for each one of those cases. Now again, we do have our, now notice we have case autumn, case fall. So if you type in autumn or fall, you're going to basically get the same thing. So if I have a case followed by a case, again, since there's no break after that case, it's going to fall to the next one. And in this case, fall. Kind of a. So if we run this, and I click Run as a Java application, and in this case, I'm going to type in autumn, and I hit the Enter key, it basically says, oh, helps if I spell it correctly. So let me rerun it. So A-U-T-U-M-N, and basically el tono. Okay, and if I run it again, and this time I type in fall, we get the same thing. So, switch statement. Okay, we'll basically see in a little bit for the next section of this chapter.